In this video I'm going to show you how to make a fried potato breakfast skillet. It takes about 30 minutes to make or so. Some of the stuff you're going to need for this is obviously your potatoes, 1 or 2 depending on how much you want to eat, something to cook your potatoes in, pan, skillet, what have you, a colander and bowl to rinse and soak the potatoes in, I'll get to that in a minute, and your assortment of spices or seasonings. In particular I choose some seasoned pepper, some paprika for coloring and additional spice, some seasoned salt, which is pretty much the mainstay of any recipe for me involving potatoes. I do like my salt. A little bit of onion powder, some chili powder for additional kick, and a little bit of garlic salt. In general, salt, pepper, garlic, and onion are good choices. Now, before we clean the potatoes, we're going to fill the bowl with water so that we can put in the chopped potato pieces. If you're familiar with preparing potatoes, you'll know that leaving them exposed to air for too long will cause them to turn brown. In addition, potatoes are mostly water. As they sit, they will lose that water over time, causing the starch in them to turn into a sticky gum, making it difficult to keep them from sticking to a pan. Placing the chopped potatoes into the water will help dissolve this gum and make it easier to fry the potatoes. With our bowl filled with water, we can now clean the potatoes. Ideally, you would do this with a brush, but I couldn't find one handy. While cleaning the potatoes, make sure you remove any sprouts that might be budding around the potato. You won't be eating those. Alright, with our potatoes cleaned and our bowl filled with water, we're ready to start cutting. Grab your favorite knife, and we'll start by making a cut right down the center of the potato. After this, we'll make cuts on either side of the potato to separate it into smaller pieces. The size of these cuts can be approximately 1/4 inch apart from each other. Really depends on how big of chunks you want to have for potatoes, keeping in mind that the bigger the chunks are, the longer it's going to take to cook them. So you can see here a potato with a couple cuts across it. What we're going to do now is split it in half, or, well, mostly in half. They don't always turn out equal size anyway. And do the same thing with the smaller sections. Make 1 cut down the center, and then 1 or 2 cuts on either side to separate it into smaller chunks. With that done, the last step in dicing these potatoes is to make cuts along the length of the potato in order to get the right sized cubes that we're looking for. Once finished cutting a potato half into cubes, those cubes can be put into the bowl to soak. Repeat the cutting for the remaining potatoes until they have all been diced and placed into the bowl. If you come across any darkened or bruised sections of potato while cutting, you can easily toss those out. Now with our potatoes cut, it's time to rinse them. As mentioned before, this is to help keep the potatoes from sticking to the pan when we cook them later. A quick rinse should do the trick. If you aren't using a colander, just repeatedly fill and drain the bowl, mixing the potatoes around to clean them. You'll notice that the water will become discolored while doing this. When the water looks relatively clear, the potatoes have been well rinsed and nothing more will be coming off of them. With the potatoes prepared, it's time to turn on the burner and start heating up the pan. These potatoes will be cooked on medium-high heat to start with. After we add our seasoning, this can change depending on how long you want to wait for your potatoes to be finished. Once the pan is heated, we'll bring over the potatoes and put them into the pan. Before putting the potatoes in, we give them a moment to shed any excess water that will slow down the cooking process. Once the potatoes are in the pan, we'll begin stirring them around while the heat evaporates what is left of the water that the potatoes were soaked in. Once all the water has evaporated, the potatoes will begin to stick a little to the pan. This is usually indicated by leftover potato skin on the bottom of the pan. Once the potatoes have reached this point, I like to add some oil to keep the potatoes from sticking. Adding oil before this point is generally a bad idea, as mixing hot water and oil can lead to spattering and burning yourself. For this meal, I've chosen to use some olive oil, a healthy choice as far as oils go. I'll add approximately a tablespoon of oil depending on how many potato chunks I have in the pan. Once we've added the oil to the pan, we'll mix the potatoes around to make sure that the oil evenly coats all of them and prevents them from sticking. Now that we've added the oil, we will begin watching for the potatoes to brown. When a good portion of the potatoes have visibly browned, it would be a good time to add our seasonings. I tend to put more salt in my potatoes than anything else, so there is usually a tablespoon or more of seasoned salt in this meal. The rest of the seasonings are approximately a teaspoon's worth, but again, this is largely up to your own personal preference. I will though advise against over-seasoning your potatoes, which will just result in you tasting more seasoning than potato, which would be a shame because potatoes are delicious. Once you've finished adding seasoning to your potatoes, you should end up with something that looks sort of like this. Now we'll mix the potatoes around so that the seasoning gets spread among the potatoes, then continue cooking until they're ready. You can either leave the potatoes covered or uncovered while you wait, but make sure you check on them and stir every minute or so to make sure they aren't burning. The true way to check if potatoes are actually done to your liking, though, is of course to taste it. So, grab a potato and let it cool down a bit before tasting it. The two considerations I usually have for my potatoes are whether the seasoning tastes alright and whether the potato is soft enough when you chew it. Passing that test, these potatoes are good to go. But wait, I said I was going to make a breakfast skillet. All I have here are potatoes. That does not a complete breakfast make. Ah, yes, these will do nicely. Now you can either whip these eggs in a bowl beforehand, or if you're a lazy college student like I was, you could just crack them into the pan. Now, just as if you were making scrambled eggs, mix the potatoes and egg together until you can see that the eggs have completely cooked and are no longer runny. Of course, if you want to be traditional, you could cook eggs to your liking in a separate pan if you wanted and add some toast. When finished, grab a plate and serve up your freshly cooked meal. You could also add on extra toppings. In particular, I tend to grate some cheddar cheese on top. Another favorite dish of mine involves mixing this with some fried beans to create a delicious breakfast bean dip. And after 30 minutes of preparation and cooking, here's a fried potato breakfast skillet.